welcome to Season 6 of How I Made It Through. As I've said before, it is often through pain and suffering that we learn our most profound lessons. It is through courageously exploring the inner landscape of our lives and seeking healing that we transform. Joining me this season is my newest co-host, Bernadette Thompson. Bernadette and I invite you to join us, now twice a week, as we continue to explore the extraordinary stories of those who've had near-death and spiritually transformative experiences, or are simply wise and old souls sent here to help the collective awaken and heal. Our show reminds us that death of the body does not mean death of the soul, and that indeed we do transition into the wonder of the afterlife and come back again and again and again. Our hope is that each episode will serve as inspiration for your own spiritual discovery. We thank you for joining us in this powerful learning and ask that you subscribe, comment, like, and share. Together, we can spread the growing awareness that we are all infinite souls sent to Earth School at this very unique and miraculous time in human evolution. Well, Micah, welcome so much to How I Made It Through. It is absolutely thrilled to have you here. I'm going to go ahead and read your bio, and then we'll just dive into listening to your story and engaging in a conversation. Micah Stover is a prominent voice in the emerging field of psychedelic therapy and brings over 8 years of experience and training from clinical and indigenous perspectives to her work. She is a certified psychedelic somatic therapist and avid contributor to the critical conversation around safety and harm reduction. She is also a contributing writer on the board for Women on Psychedelics, one of the most rapidly growing platforms for women seeking healing and community with psychedelic medicines. In addition to her therapeutic training, Micah brings over 15 years of coaching and teaching experience to her practice. Her work focuses on supporting clients in leveraging psychedelics to catalyze healing and transformation. You can find Micah's work featured on revered podcasts like 10 Laws with East Forest and Back from the Abyss, as well as key media outlets like Double Blind. She hosts monthly retreats in Mexico and travels all over the U.S. to present and facilitate retreats. Welcome again.
Thank you so much for having me. I'm so glad to be here.
Before I forget, will you also mention you have a recent book? Can you share the title and where people can find it?
I have just a little picture. I have a copy right here.
Oh, so exciting.
Healing Psychedelics. And people can find the book on Amazon or really anywhere where books are sold, Barnes and Noble, places like this. People can also go on my website, which is just my name, Micah Stover with a V. .com, and people can also find me at Micah Sugarfoot on Instagram. And all of those places, I talk a lot about the book. So yeah.
Okay, wonderful. Well, to set the stage, this is going to be part one of 2 parts. Today is really your story, which is so germane to people understanding what you personally have gone through that has initiated you into the role you now occupy with such integrity, passion, and care. And then the next part 2 will really be more of a deep dive into psychedelic medicine and your role in facilitating healing and transformation for people who seek it.
Great.
All
That's
right.
nice.
Okay, fabulous. Well, let's start from the beginning. Where do you think is the beginning of your story as it relates to all of this?
Gosh, this is such a good question. There's an organization called MAPS, which is they have been one of the leading organizations for the clinical trials and research for psychedelic therapy. And I'm just going to reference this because it relates to your question. In MAPS, when they were as part of the intake process for the clinical trials, they asked people about what they'll often refer to as the index event or the inciting event. And this is the event that people, when they come to seek therapy, are like, this is when everything fell apart for me. And often that's like they're thinking of it as the beginning of the crisis, but really what we find when we open things up, often with the help of psychedelic medicines, is that the inciting event is kind of like a mirror to something that happened way back before. It could be not even in your lifetime, it could be ancestral. So, to your question, I think the inciting event that brought me to this point that I am at now was my pregnancy and birth of my oldest son. Um, Now that I've done a lot of work over the last 8 years, I can really see how his birth and everything that happened there was an echo of a lot from my childhood and my past. But um, I went into that pregnancy with like this vision that becoming a mother and being pregnant would reorient me to my body, to being a woman. I read every Ina May Gaskin book that I could get my hands on. If people don't know, she is like the mother of midwifery. I mean, I carted her books around like, an evangelical takes the Bible places. I was reading it and consuming it ravenously. And I had all of these visions for this transformative experience. And then pretty early in my pregnancy, I started having complications. The first thing that happened is I experienced something called a vanishing twin, which is still like they don't totally understand, but there were two and then there was one. And it was so early in the pregnancy that the message I got was like, you don't even need to think about that because this is precarious and we need to focus on the other baby. So I took the expert's advice, as we often do, and just compartmentalized that grief for a long, long time and was so focused on the survival of the other baby, which seemed fine. Like I had severe hyperemesis, which is not pleasant. If anyone's had it, they know it's terrible.
Yeah,
But
you and I bonded over that because we both had that.
it's a terrible experience. It's like morning sickness on steroids. I was losing weight instead of gaining weight, and I'd already lost this baby. So there's a theme of loss and a fixation on holding.
Yeah.
And then at 27 weeks, I had the first placental abruption, which is when, the uterus sort of and the placenta split apart, and that's not good for mom or baby. And I woke up that morning, it was still dark outside, and I thought my water had broken because I felt so much moisture. And then as we turned on the light, I saw that I was sitting in literally a pool of blood, which is terrifying. And, I'm calling the midwife and she's like, you need to go to the hospital. Or you need to go right now. And so I went to the hospital, and I mean, everything from that moment is sort of a blur, and then shards that are crystal clear, which is often how trauma works. Like it's blurry, and then there's these like random details that you can see with laser focus. And I don't remember much about getting to the hospital, but I just remember when I heard his heartbeat, and they were like, "He's okay. He's okay." And so then I was like, "Well, then I'm okay." So they kept me there for about a week. And then they were like, there's been no more bleeds. You and baby seem fine. So we'll send you home. Well, that next morning or that evening, I can't remember time exactly, but when I was getting up to gather my things, I had another placental abruption. And so then they were like, well, girlfriend, you're not going home because this is just a little bit too high risk. We're going to keep you here. At that point, I was 28 weeks. So it was dangerous to deliver at that point. And I mean, despite having some lovely nurses and doctors who took care of me, there is nothing about being in a hospital that is like a wellness experience. It's a triage emergency scene. And so from 27 weeks until 33, when my son was born, because after those placental abruptions, we were just sort of hanging out on watch, plugged into machines, like under surveillance. And at like 31 weeks, I developed preeclampsia. Well, literally like every complication that you can have in pregnancy, we had together. And at 33 weeks, it was so severe that they were like, it's not safe for either of you. So we need to do an emergency cesarean. And this was not my vision as I had planned, but also at that point, I had sort of lost the vision and was just like, I just want my son. I
Yeah.
just want him to be okay. And I should say that the backstory to all of this is like 3 years before I got pregnant, I was not sure that I wanted a child, but I had a dream about my son. And in the dream, he said to me, he sort of appeared kind of like in the distance, but he felt so familiar. And I was like, do I know you? Do you need my help? And he was like, nope, don't need your help, but you definitely need mine. And I'm your son and I want you to call me Ezra. And so I'm bringing that up because through those harrowing weeks in the hospital, the thing that kept me tethered to reality, to sanity, was that dream of like, there's no way that this is all happening, and this child that was so real in spirit land it's not going down like this. So he was born, and I had a rare situation. Most preeclampsia resolves itself upon delivery. It's just like a hormonal thing. I was one of the anomaly cases where it got worse. And so we were not allowed to be together for almost 48 hours. And in that 48 hours, I lost my mind. Um, and
Mhm.
it's really interesting to me because I am clinically trained, but also I have had the blessing and gift to be indigenously studied at this point. From a clinical standpoint, I was diagnosed as having a postpartum psychotic break. Now, that can look like a lot of different things depending on the person. In my case, it looked like I was telling people there are ghosts talking to me. And I'm sure from the outside looking in, I seemed kind of unhinged. Now, meanwhile, down here in Mexico, any curandera that I would speak with is like, no, you were talking to your ancestors and they were talking to you. And so it's just interesting, I think, to kind of examine that place where madness and divinity kind of come together.
Yes.
So it's a very long-winded answer to your question, but this was the inciting event that really brought me to like a breaking point where the reality that I'd built up to that point that looked successful on the outside, in the face of having this tiny little preemie and nothing having gone the way I imagined, I found myself feeling shattered, but also compelled to do something all at the same time. And at that time, which was 2016, a lot of the first sort of surge of clinical trial success was coming out about psychedelic therapy. It's certainly not something I was thinking about. But it sort of came to me like that, up in the wee hours of the night when he was not strong enough yet to breastfeed. I had to pumps and then feed him in the bottle. I just kept coming across these articles talking about the glaring success of psychedelics. And I thought, maybe this is something I need to try. It's totally illogical because other parts of me were like, girl, you just had a baby. You're barely holding on. This is probably not a good time to go like salivate a patient in the psychedelic realm. But I think in reality, I was already in the psychedelic realm.
Right. Ah, I love your long answer, and I just want you to keep going, but before you do, I'd love to get
Sure.
out of your way and you just tell your story. But your ancestors are speaking to you. You've got 2 different
Mhm.
perspectives. One is postpartum psychosis, and the other is your ancestors coming through. Do you have any recollection of some of the messages they were conveying?
Yeah. They were like, stop being quiet. Stop keeping secrets. Stop protecting the predators. You have got to be a mother. And a mother is strong and she is fierce. She does not acquiesce. She is not quiet. She is not submissive. She is fierce. And that is a total pivot for me. And I think it's something that was accessible to me at this time in life and history that was not available to them. I should also say that
Mm.
on my paternal side, my great grandmother, my aunties, they were Appalachian mountain people, and many of them were midwives. And
Mhm.
in that part of the country at that time, these women were often considered witches because
Mhm.
they had so much
Chills everywhere.
power. And their power, depending on if you had a woman in trouble who could die, was what you were wanted, or you shamed them, you persecuted them when you didn't need them. Right.
Micah, I have chills, like,
Yeah, I know.
rushing through me right now.
Your story's amazing, and I so resonate with the ancestors. It's just, yeah, because that's who came to me. That's who woke me up, was my
It felt
ancestors.
like, at the time, I've had 8, almost 9 years now to process all of this. At the time, it didn't sound or feel eloquent. Like, now when I hear it, I'm like, "Oh my god, so much gratitude for them and for me and for the role that my son played in this, like, the kind of, like, cosmological
Mhm.
orchestration that he was connected to them directly and indirectly, and I couldn't have thought this up if I tried. It is a
Exactly.
design beyond me. Um,
Exactly.
right.
Exactly. And if I go into territory, and this is not live and Courtney can cut it, like, I don't want
Mm,
us to go into territory that's, not something you want to discuss or feel
Mhm.
comfortable discussing. But what strikes me too, this may be projection on my part, is really owning the the power of the feminine
yes.
and your relationship to your body previously, your family of origin story, and really claiming who you are versus who you were conditioned to be.
Yes.
Mhm.
100%. And I'm totally okay with talking about it because I think that this happens so much and is so extreme to women. Like, women, I think, in our modern society have been patriarchalized so that
Mhm.
women, like, and I have so much empathy, so I want to be careful in how I say it, because there, in my healing process, there have been parts of me that have felt anger at my mother. Why? Because my mother, I don't know, she was disembodied in some ways. But also, my healing has helped me soften the edges of that anger into a place of true empathy for her, where both can exist, that there are parts of me that are righteously enraged that she couldn't protect me from certain things. And then
Mhm.
the mother in me that softened and healed also recognizes that in her generation, in her time, she was doing exactly what she was being guided and told to do, which is like that the whole first rendering of the feminist movement was, girl, go get it. You be equal. You can work. You can have a salary. You can. But what that became is you do everything. And you do everything at great sacrifice to yourself. So motherhood became this like martyrdom, this great body of sacrifice. And I think that there's so much healing that we have to do. And I feel this as like part of the opportunity. I'm choosing that word intentionally, not burden, the opportunity of my generation to say, no, I don't think we're designed equally. I think we're designed intentionally different. And we, women and men, have different strengths. And when we allow those differences to exist without a need to equivocate, we are actually very complementary to one another.
Mm,
Mhm.
mm. Oh god,
Mhm.
that's
And
really well.
and sometimes when you look at certain indigenous cultures, they have that a little bit more than we have that. This our culture, it is and still is in so many ways patriarchal. And mostly because of society not yet ready to recognize that we just what you were saying, that we can complement each other and still be strong, each being so incredibly strong.
Right.
Right, that it's not a competition.
Hmm.
That it's not just saying what is more valuable, who holds the cards, who holds the power. It's really saying there is sacred in both, and
Yeah.
that it is by design.
that it
Mhm.
is by design, and that this is the other like point of departure. I think that the patriarchalizing of the feminine made us move away from our intuitive maternal instinct and become more cerebral and more cognitive, analytical. And I don't think that I mean, I'm totally analytical. I love to geek out on things. And also, my healing has come through like a return home to my maternal primal instincts, which are housed in my body, which are not cerebral. They are
Mhm.
like felt instincts. And it's really interesting to me that in many indigenous cultures, the women are seen as the sort of sacred, the spirit leaders, and
Yes.
the men are harnessing the protection of that.
Right.
Which to me, if I think about it through like nature's design lens, it makes sense. Of course, women are the spiritual. We literally are the portals from which the spirits
Mhm.
speak through. The
Yeah.
channel is our body.
Yes.
Of
Mhm.
course, we're more in touch.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Absolutely. Well, let's get back to more of the immediacy of your unfolding. So Ezra is born, and he's a premature, very fragile little being, and you have this experience of psychosis through the Western lens, through the indigenous. It's these ancestors speaking to you. What happens next?
Well, yeah, I mean, at that time we were still in Portland. And Portland, Oregon is a mecca of alternative healing, which is wonderful. And it was probably the most alive place at the time for the underground psychedelic work. I would say
Yeah.
now it's dispersed and is in other places, but it was I always so my background academically, I studied philosophy and in particular Asian philosophies like Buddhism and Taoism. And there's this idea that if you're on the word the Tao refers to the way, and one of the metaphors for the way is the river. And so if you're on your right way, then you're flowing with the river. You're going with the current. So one of the ways you might gauge that maybe this isn't right for me is if it's really, really hard.
Yeah.
Doesn't mean that there aren't hard things in life, but that maybe you're going against the current. I think of this and how the psychedelic path sort of unfolded for me. It was like no challenge. This thing that seemed to my logical mind totally like, you are crazy. Are you really going to do this? And what are you thinking? Was like, let me just ask this one person. Oh, this one person has they're already doing this, and they have had amazing experiences with this very skilled therapist who is very knowledgeable and say I met with her. It was like an immediate yes. And so it began, you know, and Ezra, despite his small stature, I mean, this message was clear to me even in the hospital, because I was panic stricken and convinced that like if we took him away from all of their machines that he would stop breathing and I would lose him too.
Yeah.
And I remember this one doctor in particular saying to me, listen, I'm going to walk with you to the room with the other babies. And I want you to look. These other babies are like twice the size of your little guy right here. And he's doing like twice the things that they're doing. This kid has no idea that he's tiny. So, so don't worry about him. He
Oh.
is like a fighter. And I mean, I think that going back to that dream, this is one of the things he has come to catalyze in me. To be the mother of a child so strong demands that I be fully embodied and
Mhm.
not afraid of my own power at all.
Mhm. Mm.
And so he has he is still like that. I mean, if you ask Ezra today, what do you want to be when you grow up? I mean, it could change from being a soccer player, or oftentimes the answer is I'm going to fight the bad guys. Who are the bad guys, Ezra? Every single one of them. Like, this is just the constitution and the archetypal composition that he came into the world with.
Mhm.
And to match him there, to meet him in that level of strength requires invites. It's an invitation for me to be so embodied in myself.
Let's slow this down.
I know, it's like
Well, I wanna deconstruct the word embodied and then power and what those both
Mhm.
mean to you.
Yeah.
Yeah. Well, those are great questions and I love it. So because I do think language is so important, and often we use these words, but we're not necessarily in a shared space of understanding around them. So I love
Mhm.
that you're asking them. So the me prior to Ezra, prior to the psychotic breakthrough, I was not in my body. I was a range of hyper-vigilantly trying to control my body to disassociated because I couldn't handle the amount of trauma and like stored stress in my own nervous system.
Yes.
So to be embodied, I didn't even know what that meant.
Yeah.
No idea. It wasn't until I had these experiences with psychedelics, and I want to be really clear. We can talk more about this in part 2, but psychedelics are not the cure. They didn't cure me, they didn't fix this, they did help. What they helped me to do is face the things that were stored in my nervous system that were so formidable that my conscious mind was not willing to look at them. They were like padlocked inside, deep, deep, deep down. So no wonder embodiment was hard. I built worlds and architecture around these memories to survive. Because as kids, we can't face certain things. It's just too crushing, right? So I had to actually face certain things that were devastating that had happened in my past in order to be be at home in my body. Because in some ways, and I do believe that this is part of why my pregnancy with him was so volatile, is that I wasn't even in there.
Yes. God, I relate. God, I
Yeah.
relate. Yeah.
I wasn't even in there. And who can really fault him? This is how I genuinely feel, for not wanting to travel through a canal that was full of scar tissue and pain.
Yeah.
Like my second pregnancy, totally natural. They told me you can't do it. You shouldn't even have another baby. He was born in a birth center. I had no medical interventions. What is the difference?
Yeah.
Resolution of trauma.
Resolution of trauma.
Yeah. It's so important.
I
Right.
just know so many of us are walking around with so
Mhm.
much trauma stored in our nervous systems.
Mhm.
And it is that sense of emotional, physical, or spiritual annihilation of fear
Mhm.
that it's so formidable. I love that word. I know that for myself with certain areas of trauma. I had a trauma of almost dying at
Mm,
about 6 years old at the hands of my father. And it's
mm,
the same thing if I experience panic and it's in the
right.
body.
Mhm.
Body. Because
Yes.
the body stores these things. You know, we human animals, we think that we're so much more sophisticated. And in some ways we are, but in some ways we've just forgotten how to be primal.
Right.
Like out
Mm.
in the wild, if an animal faces a threat, like a predator comes along and poses a threat, what is one of the number one responses an animal will make is to play dead,
Mhm.
because then predator moves on because they like the challenge of the fight, right? So in the wild kingdom, once the predator is passed, this animal that's playing dead snaps out of it and then does any number of primal responses. It might poop, it might pee, it might let out a wild sound, it might shake like crazy,
Shake.
like any
Exactly.
number of physiologically cathartic things to
Discharge.
discharge the stress from the body. We human animals, I would say, play dead, but don't do. I don't know how I made that happen. We don't do anything to discharge the stress. So we continue
Gotcha.
playing dead. That's disassociation,
Mhm.
or become really hypervigilant, which is a lot of control. This is like people who have eating disorders, which I had.
Right.
These are all ways to control that primal terror that's behind.
Mhm.
Right. And then we
Yeah.
walk around so dysregulated. We encounter something that gets that adrenaline and cortisol and the fear. And
Oh.
it's the nervous system reaction. Either we play possum, we play dead, we dissociate, like you said, we disassociate,
Mhm.
or we want to run, but maybe we're in a corporate meeting or a
Mhm.
one-on-one Zoom call, and you're trying to fake it till you make it while it's a 5-alarm fire, and there is no discharge. There is no reset. It's the accumulation in the architecture, to use your words.
Right.
Mhm.
And then
Yeah.
this war, almost this battle between
Side.
your
Yeah.
body and your nervous
Mhm.
system and your mind
Mhm.
Right.
and your concept of self.
Totally. And so this is just heartbreaking, because you just think how, I think we all know in this group, like, how many women that's real for,
Yes.
Mhm.
and then we're
Mhm.
trying to mother from that
Mhm.
space, mother ourselves, mother our mothers, mother our children,
Mhm.
and so back to your original question of deconstructing this idea of what is embodiment. So embodiment to me was a lengthy process of discharging so much stored trauma that I could
Mhm.
actually feel, like I can feel myself as at ease
Yes.
at my core.
Yes.
I don't stay there all the time, because I'm still a living human,
You're
and
still
there's
alive.
Yeah,
I
exactly.
know that place inside myself. So I know when
Well,
I've left it, and I know how to return to it.
Exactly.
yeah, and you understand it. You understand what it is when it comes up, which is what's huge about understanding trauma. And
Yeah.
and even, as you were talking, makes me think of the trauma that is also passed down to us through the ancestral. So, and even just patterns of behavior that just keep the trauma going, the trauma reactions going, and that this is the way we um yeah, it's fascinating. This
And
conversation's amazing.
it's in science. One of the ways that people talk about it now is this idea of epigenetics, right?
Exactly.
So it's like the one way I've heard people, a woman named Rachel Yehuda described it so well. It's like genetics are the hardware of a person, and epigenetics are the software. And that's such a beautiful, succinct way to explain something that's really complicated. What the research has shown is that if we update the software enough, the hardware itself starts to reflect the changes, which is
Mhm.
incredible. This is incredibly hopeful
Yes,
for
it is.
humanity.
Yes,
Like,
it is.
it really is that and I feel like I am living that experience, like that.
Mhm.
And it's so fascinating to me to go back to just my ancestors who were midwives, who lived in birth trauma. And this is how this crack began for me their in their room, so to speak. And when
Yeah.
I sit with people in ceremony, I often think I feel the most connected to them in their channel of midwifery. Like, it's a different kind of birth, to
Mhm.
Mhm.
rebirth oneself out of trauma into embodiment.
Into embodiment, which then yields your connection to your own power. What does
Yes.
power mean to you,
Yeah.
particularly in
Mhm.
your story?
Yeah. This is another one that I love that you're asking me to deconstruct it, because I think people talk a lot about power, and it's like, I'm not sure that I'm even bought into that, to the version of power that people are talking about. Like, I don't know. It's like power to me is agency, like recognizing that I have choice,
Mhm.
that I consent is not something I have to give because someone is telling me you need to sign a form. Like that young woman, me, who had all of those interventions with Ezra, was coerced into so much consent. embodied me, who is connected to her agency, knows that I could say, back up.
Mhm.
Like, I need more balloons. Back up. I need a moment to think. Like, your urgency does not have to be mine.
Mhm.
Right. So I
Yeah.
think power is not about rah, 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 asserting oneself. Power is more about being able to deflect other people's shit,
Mhm.
other
Yeah.
projections and urgencies so that we don't take it on.
Well, the word that comes up for me is sovereignty. There's
Yes.
a beautiful sovereign boundary that says, I know where I end and you begin, and I'm fully in touch with my intuition, my discernment, my wisdom, and I am not afraid to protest,
Mhm.
to defend what I know is truth or valuable.
Yes. I love
Micah,
that.
I have a question about so you had been talking about your ancestors after Ezra's birth and that they were the ghosts were there. And they talked to you about power. Did you and that to be strong and what you had inside you. Did you feel that before they had come, like, during was that part of, did you feel that power as a young woman before you became a mother? Or was it something that the ancestors really guided you with?
It's such a good question. I did feel that power before, but I experienced it as being crushed over and over and over again, namely by my father, who
Okay.
I was like a huge threat for him because I was not. I mean, one of the things he said to me regularly as a kid was, I hope someday you find a man who will put you in your place. Right. And so I, I knew, I think what, even in that, like, I knew that I was powerful. I mean, it's a whack way to say it, and you can definitely do it better, but I don't know how to explain it except to say that it was clear to the little parts of me that I was a threat to him, which obviously means I have power,
Yes.
but that's age inappropriate. And my mother, bless her heart, was so disconnected and disembodied that she did not stand up to him. So many times I was the one inserting myself. So I think I did know inherently that I had power, but there was no permission granted. In fact, there was a
Mhm.
rejection of that. And then a really fun, we love to do this, like, let's put all the focus on your appearance. Let's
Mhm.
make that your currency. And that is a whole other thing that we do to women.
Yep. Yep.
Mhm.
Which goes back to the word power. Then a woman can very easily fall into the illusion that my only currency, my only power
Mhm.
is my
Appearance.
appearance, my beauty, my seeking of beauty. And then as you begin to age, if you haven't done your work, who
Right.
you are is becoming
It's
it's
Mhm.
disintegrating before you rather than embracing the cycle of aging.
right. I'll share this because this is part of my story. Like, one of the most, I mean, they're all in my ceremony experience. It's like ceremony feels like going to spirit school where I'm most connected to my ancestors, and there's so much wisdom that comes through. I think I don't remember where in the book, but there's a part in the book that talks about this particular ceremony because it was so impactful. And basically it was like, the scene as it appeared to me in the ceremony was I was in a forest or the jungle or something very green and lush and natural. And there was a preoccupation inside me with this, like, loss of my maidenhood, this, like, losing this thing that society covets and says is your value, is your currency, because I was becoming mother. And And you're actually not both. You maidens don't make for good moms, as it turns out, because they're not supposed to know. They don't know that much yet. And so as this the whole thing sort of unfolded, I saw kind of in the distance that there was this table, and the table was full of elders. And they were most of them were women, and they were older and like mature, and they had wrinkles and gray hair, and they were beautiful.
Right.
They were
Mhm.
so beautiful, and
Right.
their beauty was like through their wisdom and their embodiment. And at some point in this whole experience, one of them sort of said to me, "We have a seat for you. You
Aw.
can come and sit with us. You don't have to try to stay over there. Over here, come be with us. Let us help you
Mhm.
understand things. Let us help you see yourself." And it was just such a liberating experience, to a kind of initiation, to use that word again, to be emancipated from this patriarchal model that says my currency diminishes as I age. No,
Yes.
nonsense.
Bullshit.
Yeah. So I had this experience. My daughter, when my daughter had a baby,
Mm,
that was it was amazing because in that moment, the moment that she gave birth, she became the mother, and
mm.
I obviously became the grandmother. But
Mother.
I also felt that she was going from maiden to mother, and I was going from mother to the word that is often used now as crone,
I love that word.
and so and I felt that so powerfully that she was no longer the maiden, and that it was time for me to move to take that next step as well. And so I just love the way you described it. And as I was going through my awakening, I imagined all of my ancestors sitting around a table with me. And
Right.
so there was that connection. So beautiful. Thank you
It's a
for sharing that.
Yeah, and thank you for sharing that. That gave me goosebumps. I mean, I think it's amazing to be conscious as you are, to be able to see that and recognize that, and then mirror that back to your daughter, because that gives her more permission and invitation to step forward and feel so beautiful in that. And also, like, I mean, down here in Mexico, one of the most revered roles is the role of abuela, which is
Mhm,
which is grandmother. It's like grandmother she's got it going on, because
mhm,
she pretty much knows it all.
Yeah.
Like, it is
mhm,
such a coveted in the right way, like respect, sovereign, that word. I love that word. And I just, I hope that listeners feel just inspired and permission to let all of that patriarchal
mhm,
feeling of needing to be
mhm.
the
Boxed
youth
in.
is so
Yeah,
limited.
It's so limited.
yeah.
It's so limited, and it keeps us from accessing our
Mhm,
embodiment, our power, our wisdom, our voice.
mhm.
So we are go ahead, Bernadette. I don't
No,
I
I was just going to say, and even if they're still in the maiden stage, that they also feel that strength, because that's often
Exactly.
where the patriarchal is the strongest, you know, in terms of um, limiting what they feel their power is.
Right. Well,
100%.
I just want to say this on too, because I want to make sure listeners don't think it's a criticism of maidenhood. Maidenhood is also a beautiful passage. And I think with
Mhm,
the right support from a healthy mom and a healthy dad and a healthy village, then the maiden gets to like explore her blossoming. She gets to come into her body in a positive
A
way. And
positive
so the
way.
seeds are being set for everything that comes next. So each stage
It's
holds its
important.
own kind of
mhm,
potency. Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. We could continue talking for so long because there's so much here, and it's just such
Mhm.
a treat to be able to explore it with you, Micah, and you as well, Bernadette. We each bring such unique experiences.
Mhm.
We need to start winding down, and I think a nice way to do so would be to maybe give a little peek into what part two might be about. So, saying how this conversation and your story segues to part two.
Yeah. Well, let me see. So, I had a full career that was going prior to that crazy pregnancy. I had a private coaching practice at that point. We were in Portland. I was doing a lot of work with companies like Adidas and Nike and professional development. And I thought at the time I was very fulfilled in that work. But once I started my own kind of psychedelic experience, it was really clear, oh, this is where I belong. This is like why it's fulfilling, but not quite. Like, because the depth of this is where I want to be. This is where I feel most at home in this like wild space where everything blows up. I'm like ready to go. um, but I also think it's important to say because a lot of people have experiences and feel called to do the work. And being called to do the work does not equivocate a readiness to do the work. So it was not, I had a few ceremonies and then started guiding people. No, I had that spirit call to do this work. And it was also, and so you better get to work. And that means continuing to heal yourself above all else, and also studying and training. I mean, I've done extensively more training since that so that I can truly be trauma conscious. When people come to these unprocessed traumatic memories, we without some level of training and study, I don't think we're adequately equipped to meet people and really help them transform or alchemize the wound.
Mm.
We might be able to be empathic and be good listeners and in that moment help them feel some reprieve, but that is different than actually working in a co-creative sort of way to help someone alchemize something.
Mm.
Mhm.
Fascinating. So there's a lot in store for part two to
Mhm.
understand what that looks like, how you trained, some of the transformations, or any other thing that you want to explore so people can demystify and
Mhm.
understand what this process is all about.
Yeah.
Mhm.
Amazing. You are so extraordinary. Thank you so
Yes.
much for joining us.
Thank
Um,
you.
we've already talked about your website. We talked about your book. Anything else you want to share? Any parting thoughts?
Well, thank you so much for having me. I feel like I could talk to you both all day. I think that parting thoughts. When I have conversations like this with people, sometimes folks will say things like, "Well, maybe I just need to move to Mexico," or "I don't think this sort of connectedness is available where we are." And one of the things that I talk about in the book, and I like to talk about with everyone, is that I think that it's not it's about making a conscious choice to slow down,
Mhm.
to deconstruct productivity as a measure of success, and to reorient ourselves to presence. What does it mean to be present? And one of the best and most abundantly available resources and teachers for how to do that is nature.
Mhm.
Like most of what I experience as being different down here in Mexico has so much to do with how much more connected to the earth people are.
Mhm.
And I think our really modern, postmodern society, with all its machines and technology, part of what has made all of these things so fractured is that we don't connect enough to nature. So I would invite listeners to just think about that as an invitation, that even if once a day you put your feet on the earth, or maybe it's too cold where you are, but maybe that coldness will feel good. Like just paying attention to nature as an invitation back to our animal instincts, is a great place to begin.
Beautiful. And I'm just going to plug one other thing because I was just listening to a doctor, and he doctor of cardiology. He
Mm,
said one of the most important things for cardiovascular health, which was
mm.
astounding to me because I'd never heard this, is daily taking your bare feet and putting them on the earth.
I believe it.
Yes.
I believe that.
Yes. Yes. Thank you so much. We'll see you very, very soon for part 2.
Thank you. Sounds great. I look forward to it.
How I Made It Through is produced and distributed by EIQ Media, LLC. Elevate your emotional IQ with podcasts and content focused on overcoming adversity, leadership, mental health, entrepreneurship, spiritually transformative experiences, and more.